The first time Jacob Miller saw blood on his white shirt, it wasn't from an accident. It was from the night his world collapsed. A single red drop, bright against the perfection he'd built around himself, as if the universe wanted to remind him no amount of money could make love obey. He had just returned from a meeting at his Manhattan office, where glass towers glimmered like blades under the storm clouds. The thunder outside hadn't stopped since morning, and neither had the storm inside him. In the silence of his penthouse, the echo of his father's last words still haunted him. "Marry her, Jacob, and the company is yours. Her, Evelyn Carter." The woman sitting quietly at the end of the long marble table, hands folded in her lap, eyes soft but uncertain. A woman who didn't belong to his world of suits and secrets. She was beautiful in a way that hurt, graceful, grounded, too human for a man like him. He'd met her once before in his father's office. She'd spilled coffee on his tie, stammered an apology, and smiled with the kind of warmth that had no business surviving in a place like New York. And now she was his wife. "Do you need anything, Jacob?" Her voice was soft, careful, as if every word might break something between them. He loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze. Silence would be nice. She nodded, lips pressed together, and turned away. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving only the hum of the city beyond the windows. He hated himself for the sharpness in his tone, but hate came easier than honesty. Honesty would mean admitting that when he'd looked at her tonight, standing there in her simple white dress, her dark skin glowing under the chandelier, he'd felt something he wasn't ready to feel. Love was a luxury, and Jacob Miller never paid for luxuries twice. Hours passed. Evelyn moved through the house like a ghost, arranging dinner, lighting candles no one would see. She cooked his favorite dish, though she wasn't sure he'd touch it. When the elevator chimed and he walked in, she stood at the dining table with hope trembling in her hands. "I made roasted salmon," she said softly. "You haven't eaten since morning." Jacob glanced at her, then at the table, and said nothing. He walked straight to his study and shut the door. Evelyn stared at the untouched food. The rain outside blurred the city lights into streaks of gold and gray. For a moment she almost laughed, because she'd believed that love could warm even the coldest man in New York. But Jacob wasn't cold. He was frozen. Later that night, she found him asleep on the couch, a half-finished glass of whiskey beside him. His hand twitched in his sleep, as if chasing something just out of reach. Gently she covered him with a blanket, her fingers brushing the sharp line of his jaw. "I'll wait," she whispered, "even if it takes forever." He stirred, but didn't wake. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the penthouse, catching the edges of her wedding ring. It still felt heavy on her finger, like a promise she'd made alone. Evelyn brewed coffee, humming faintly to fill the silence. But when Jacob entered the kitchen, the melody died. "Good morning," she greeted. "Morning," he replied curtly. "I thought we could have breakfast together." "I already ate." He picked up his briefcase and turned to leave. "Jacob," she said quietly, "you don't have to hate me for what your father did." He froze. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd say something real. But then his voice came out sharp, measured. "Don't assume you know what I feel." And just like that, the door closed. When it did, Evelyn pressed her hands to her face and tried not to cry. She'd been raised to believe in patience, that love wasn't always a spark. Sometimes it was a slow burn. But Jacob's world had no space for flames. That night he didn't come home until past midnight. She waited anyway. The smell of the city clung to him, rain, asphalt, and the faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers. "Are you seeing her again?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He looked at her then, and for the first time his blue eyes weren't cold. They were dangerous. Watch your tone, Evelyn. I just want to know if I'm supposed to keep pretending this marriage means something. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the storm on his breath. You don't know anything about meaning. Her heart pounded, but she didn't look away. Then teach me. The silence between them was electric, jagged. For a moment, Jacob almost reached for her. Then he caught himself. He turned away, ran a hand through his hair, and muttered, "Don't make me care." She didn't understand what he meant until later, when she found the old photograph hidden in his drawer. Jacob, with another woman, blonde, elegant, smiling against the backdrop of a mansion. On the back was written, Sophia and Jacob 2014. The storm that night seemed louder than ever. Evelyn stood by the window, rain blurring the city lights. She could see his reflection behind her standing in the doorway. You went through my things, he said quietly. You left them out. He didn't deny it. Instead, he walked toward her, slow and deliberate. She's part of my past. She's part of your heart, Evelyn whispered. He stopped beside her close enough that their reflections almost touched. And what if she is? Evelyn's voice broke. Then, what am I, Jacob? His eyes softened for a moment, then hardened again. A mistake. The words sliced through her like glass. She turned away before he could see her tears. When he left, she sank to the floor, clutching the hem of her dress. Her heart had always believed she could fix him. But some men weren't broken. They were built to be untouchable. Still, love had never listened to logic. 2 weeks later, Jacob came home late again. But this time he was drunk, his steps uneven, his eyes unfocused. Evelyn helped him inside, her hands trembling. When she tried to take off his coat, he caught her wrist. Why do you keep trying? He muttered. Because I love you. He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Love. That word ruins everything. Then let it ruin me, she whispered. He stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Rain drummed against the windows, thunder rolling like a heartbeat. Slowly he reached up, brushed her cheek, and kissed her, desperate, uncertain, like a man fighting ghosts. The night burned away the silence that had lived between them for months. But when dawn came, Jacob was gone. Only his tie remained, draped over the chair, smelling faintly of her perfume. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, a fragile smile on her lips. For once, she didn't feel invisible. For once, she believed he might have felt something real. Outside, the city woke to a new day. Inside, she placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "Maybe this is the start." She didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything. Because sometimes, love doesn't begin with roses. It begins with ruin. If this story touched your heart, share it. Somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for love to thaw the coldest winter inside another soul. Don't give up on love. It always finds a way back. The morning after that night was quieter than Evelyn expected. The city's noise usually found its way through every window of the Miller penthouse. But that morning, no sirens, no traffic, only the hush of light trying to slip past heavy curtains. She woke alone, her fingers brushing the side of the bed where Jacob had slept. It was cold. For a moment, she let herself imagine that he had only gone to make coffee, that he would come back, carrying 2 mugs and a fragile attempt at conversation. But when she stepped into the kitchen, the coffee pot was still dry, untouched since yesterday. His briefcase was gone. So was he. She smiled to herself. But it wasn't real. "You didn't really think it meant something, did you?" she whispered. Her voice cracked a little, but she straightened her shoulders and began to clean the counter, as if scrubbing away her own foolishness. The day went on as usual, empty rooms, unread messages, and the ticking of the clock that counted her waiting. At noon, The doorbell rang. Evelyn's heart leaped. She wiped her hands quickly, smoothed her hair, and opened the door, only to find a courier holding a folder with the Miller Holdings logo. Mrs. Miller. These are for Mr. Miller. He asked that you sign for them. She hesitated. He's not home. I was told to leave them with you. She signed the form and took the envelope. It was sealed with Jacob's name printed neatly on top. Her curiosity fought against her conscience, and conscience lost. Inside were documents, financial reports, corporate agreements, and tucked between them, a photograph. Sophia Hamilton, blonde hair, familiar smile, standing beside Jacob at a charity gala years ago, her hand resting over his heart. Evelyn's chest tightened. She wanted to tear the photo apart, but something inside her refused. Instead, she slid it back into the envelope, folded it shut, and placed it on the marble counter. When Jacob came home that night, he looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his jaw tense. Evelyn tried to sound casual. Long day. He nodded. Meetings never end. I saw a delivery came for you, she said softly. Jacob looked up, suspicion flickering in his gaze. Did you open it? I signed for it, she replied, steady but careful. That's not what I asked. She swallowed hard. Yes, I did. He exhaled sharply, setting his briefcase down. You shouldn't go through my things. Then maybe you shouldn't keep ghosts in them, she said, her voice trembling. He turned toward her, eyes narrowing. What are you talking about, the photo? Her, Sophia Hamilton. She's married to your father, Jacob. Why do you still? He slammed his hand on the counter and she flinched. Don't say her name. Why not? Evelyn's eyes glistened. Because you still love her. He froze the silence between them, slicing through the air. For a moment he looked like he wanted to deny it, but couldn't. Evelyn. His tone softened, but it was too late. She stepped back. You used me. You married me to get back at them, didn't you? His silence was an answer. God, she whispered, shaking her head. I thought maybe last night meant something. Jacob's throat tightened. It wasn't supposed to happen. Her lips parted and her tears fell before she could stop them. You're right. It shouldn't have. I should have known better than to love someone who treats feelings like strategy. He tried to reach for her, but she moved away. Don't. Please don't touch me. He let his hand fall. I never asked you to love me. No, she said bitterly. You just let me think it wasn't hopeless. She turned and walked upstairs, every step echoing like a goodbye she wasn't ready to say. That night, Jacob didn't sleep. He poured whiskey into a glass, but didn't drink. He just stared at it, watching the light refract through the amber liquid like it held an answer. Sophia's voice haunted him from the past, her laugh, her perfume, her betrayal. And now Evelyn's tears layered over it, twisting everything inside him into something he couldn't name. He went to the bedroom door around 3 a.m., wanting to say something, anything, but stopped when he saw Evelyn asleep on the far edge of the bed, her pillow damp with tears. She looked so small, so breakable, and something sharp inside his chest began to ache. He whispered to the dark, You weren't supposed to matter. But she did. The following week was a fragile dance of silence. Evelyn stopped waiting by the window, stopped asking when he'd be home. She smiled when he entered a room, but the warmth was gone. Even the house seemed to sense the tension, the air heavier, the walls quieter. On Friday afternoon, Jacob came home early. Evelyn was in the kitchen, standing barefoot on the tile floor cooking. Her dark curls were pinned loosely, and the soft hum of jazz filled the space. He watched her for a moment, unseen, and felt something shift inside him again, something dangerously close to longing. He cleared his throat. Smells good. She turned surprised. I didn't hear you come in. I wanted to talk. She wiped her hands on a towel and nodded. About what? He hesitated. Words had always been weapons for him, not bridges. About the other night. About us. There is no us, she said quietly. Maybe there could be. Evelyn's laugh was soft and bitter. Jacob, you don't fix people by offering them half a heart. I'm not trying to fix you. No, she said, meeting his gaze. You're trying to fix yourself through me. That's not love. He wanted to argue but couldn't. She was right. For years he had buried every hurt beneath success, every loss beneath power. But Evelyn, her presence, her tenderness, unraveled all of that. When she turned back to the stove, Jacob stepped closer. I never planned to hurt you. You didn't plan to love me either. He didn't answer. Later after dinner, she excused herself to the balcony. The city glittered below like a field of stars. Jacob joined her quietly, the wind brushing his shirt sleeves. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, what it would feel like to be truly seen by someone? I see you, he said. No, she replied, shaking her head. You look at me, but you see the shadow of another woman. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. You think I still love her? I don't think, she whispered. I know. Jacob's chest rose and fell heavily. Sophia was my past Evelyn. She broke something in me that I didn't think could heal. You make me want to believe it can. Evelyn turned to him, searching his face for the truth buried in his voice. And if I believe that, Jacob, what happens when you change your mind again? I won't. You will, she said, her eyes shining. Because you don't know what love means when it doesn't come with conditions. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. The distance between them felt like an ocean. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint rhythm of his footsteps in the hallway. Something inside her whispered that she should leave, that staying would only mean losing more of herself. But another part, the one that still believed in the man she glimpsed behind the armor, begged her to hold on just a little longer. Jacob stood outside her door, his hand hovering over the handle. He wanted to apologize, to promise change, but every word felt false before it reached his lips. He turned away and went downstairs, back to the glass and silence that always waited for him. The next morning, Evelyn found a note on the kitchen counter. Business trip to Chicago. Back in a week. No love, no see you soon. Just business. She folded the note carefully, set it down, and pressed a hand over her stomach. She'd been feeling strange lately. Nauseous, dizzy, tired. She thought it was the stress, the heartbreak. But as the days passed, something deeper began to stir inside her, something she couldn't explain. By the time Jacob returned, Evelyn already knew. She didn't plan to tell him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That evening, as he walked through the door, his usual calm returned, the polished suit, the confident steps. But when their eyes met, something in her gaze stopped him cold. What is it? He asked. Nothing, she said, smiling faintly. Just tired. He nodded, but for the first time, he noticed the fragility behind her calm. You should rest. I will. When he left the room, she turned off the light and leaned against the wall, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her fingers brushed the faint curve of her abdomen, her secret blooming quietly under her skin. Maybe, she whispered to the empty room, this is the piece of love he didn't mean to give me. Outside, the city glittered cold, dazzling, indifferent. Inside, Evelyn closed her eyes and listened to the soft, steady rhythm within her. Life. And somewhere beneath all the wreckage between them, the story of their love had already begun again, quietly, invisibly, like a heartbeat in the dark. The first snow of December fell quietly over Manhattan, softening the sharp edges of the city that never slept. From the balcony of the Miller penthouse, Evelyn stood wrapped in one of Jacob's old sweaters, gray oversized, and carrying his faint scent of cedar and cologne. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside her, everything was shifting. It had been 3 weeks since she learned about the life growing within her. 3 weeks since she'd made the decision to keep it a secret. Jacob had been traveling back and forth for business, barely home long enough to notice that she no longer joined him for wine at dinner, that her appetite had changed, that she moved slower now, guarding something unseen. Tonight, though, he was home. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. That steady rhythm that used to make her heart race, and now only reminded her of distance. "You're awake," he said from behind her, his voice low, his tone softer than usual. She turned the city lights painting golden reflections in her eyes. "I couldn't sleep." He stepped closer, the cold air following him in. "You've been quiet lately." "I've always been quiet, Jacob. Not like this." She tried to smile, but it came out weary. "Maybe I just ran out of words." He looked at her for a long moment. "Are we really doing this? Pretending everything is fine?" Her breath caught. "What do you want me to say?" "Say something real." She folded her arms as if holding herself together. "Something real." "Fine. I'm tired, Jacob. Tired of fighting for something that feels one-sided. Tired of trying to love you when I'm not sure you want to be loved at all." His jaw tightened, but the pain in her voice disarmed him. "You think I don't want to be loved. I think you don't know how to let anyone love you," she whispered. He looked away toward the skyline that glittered like broken glass. "You don't understand." "No," she interrupted, voice trembling. "You don't understand. I've been here every day, trying to make this house feel like home, trying to make you feel like you're not alone. And all you've ever done is push me away." Jacob's chest rose and fell heavily. "You think it's that simple? You think I can just forget everything that came before you?" She said softly, "But I thought maybe you'd try." He took a step closer, the space between them charged with the weight of everything unsaid. "Evelyn, I'm trying. You have no idea how much I'm trying." She shook her head. "You're trying to keep control. That's not the same thing." The air between them felt too fragile to breathe. Then, before he could stop himself, Jacob reached out and touched her hand. It was the gentlest touch he'd ever given her. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. For a heartbeat, Evelyn almost believed him. But then she remembered the photo, the note, the lies. She slipped her hand free. "You can't lose something you never really had." He flinched, like her words had found the one place he'd kept unguarded. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Jacob stayed awake in his office, staring at the city below. He hated himself for the way he'd looked at her tonight, like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. He hated even more that the idea of losing her felt like drowning. When he finally went to their bedroom, she was asleep, or at least pretending to be. He stood there watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Something in his chest cracked open, and he reached out just once to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though she didn't hear him. The next morning, Evelyn woke before him. She moved quietly through the room, packing a small overnight bag. The doctor's appointment in Brooklyn was in an hour, and she couldn't risk questions she wasn't ready to answer. She slipped on her coat and left a note on the kitchen counter. "Going out. Don't wait up." At the clinic, the nurse's voice was kind. "Congratulations, Mrs. Miller. You're about 7 weeks along. The baby's heartbeat is strong." Evelyn blinked back tears. The word baby felt surreal, fragile, precious. "Would you like to hear it?" the nurse asked. She nodded. The sound filled the small room, soft, rhythmic, alive. A heartbeat, her child's heartbeat, Jacob's child. And in that moment, the world seemed to stop. Every pain, every argument, every lonely night faded under the sound of that tiny defiant rhythm. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering, "You're my reason now." When she returned home that evening, Jacob was waiting by the window, his expression unreadable. "You were gone all day. I had an appointment." "What kind of appointment?" She hesitated. "Personal." He studied her face. "You've been keeping things from me." She forced a calm smile. "We both have." His frustration surfaced. "Evelyn, I'm trying to understand you, but you keep shutting me out." "Now you know how it feels," she said quietly, walking past him. He caught her wrist, not hard, but enough to make her pause. "Don't do that. Don't walk away." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "Then give me a reason to stay." He opened his mouth, but no words came, only silence. That night, Evelyn dreamed of running through snow, through rain, through memories that wouldn't let her rest. She woke to find Jacob's side of the bed empty again. The ache of it was familiar now, almost comfortable. Over the next few days, Jacob noticed small things, how she pressed a hand to her stomach when she thought no one was watching, how she refused coffee, how she seemed both fragile and stronger than before. He didn't say anything. Not yet. But he was watching, wondering, afraid of what he might learn. One afternoon, while Evelyn was out grocery shopping, Jacob's phone buzzed, a call from Richard Hamilton. He answered with a cold tone. "What do you want?" "Just checking in," came the older man's smooth voice. "How's the marriage?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "It's none of your concern." Richard chuckled. "On the contrary, everything about your life is my concern. I made you Jacob. Don't forget that. Don't flatter yourself." "I hope you're not getting sentimental," Richard said lazily. "Remember why you married her." Jacob's grip on the phone tightened. "I remember." "Good. Because if you start to care, you'll lose everything I've given you." The line went dead. Jacob sat there for a long time, his heart pounding. The truth was, he already had started to care, and that terrified him more than any threat from Richard. When Evelyn came home, she found him sitting in the dark. "Jacob." He didn't look up. "Why did you marry me?" "Evelyn." Her breath caught. "What kind of question is that?" "Just answer me." She hesitated. "Because I loved you, even when you knew I didn't love you back." "Yes," she said simply. "Because I believed one day you might." He looked at her then, and the weight of her words hit him harder than any argument. "You shouldn't have." "I know," she whispered. "But I did." He stood, walked toward her slowly. "What if I told you I'm trying to change that?" She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Don't say things you don't mean." "I mean them," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know how to love the right way, Evelyn, but I'm starting to understand what it costs not to." Her heart clenched. "Then start by being honest." He hesitated. "About what?" "About everything," she said. "About Sophia, about your father, about why you really married me." Jacob's silence stretched between them. Then he said quietly, "I married you to take back what was mine, to hurt him, to prove that I could." Her lips parted. "And me? Was I just a weapon?" His throat tightened. "At first, and now." "Now?" He exhaled shakily. "Now you're the only thing in my life that doesn't feel like a lie." Her eyes filled with tears. You're cruel, Jacob, because part of me wants to believe you. Then believe me. I can't, she said, her voice trembling. Not anymore. He stepped closer, his hands trembling as they reached for her face. Evelyn, please. Don't, she whispered. Please don't touch me. You break everything you hold. She turned away, pressing a hand over her stomach over the secret he still didn't know. I can't do this right now. He wanted to stop her, to beg, to confess that he was afraid of losing her, afraid of what loving her might destroy. But she walked upstairs before he found the courage. That night, as snow fell thicker outside, Jacob sat alone in the living room, the sound of her footsteps fading above him. He reached for his phone, opened the old folder where he'd hidden Sophia's photo, and deleted it. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe to prove something to himself. Maybe to start over. Upstairs, Evelyn stood by the window, hand on her stomach, whispering to the life inside her. You'll never know this cold little one. I'll make sure of it. Below her, in the silence of the penthouse, Jacob finally let himself cry quietly, without shame. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was how love sometimes began. Not with trust, not with promises, but with the sound of two broken hearts trying to find the same rhythm in the dark. The sound of rain against the glass was steady, soft, like the city was whispering secrets only the lonely could hear. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, a book open in her lap, but unread. The clock on the wall marked another hour of silence between her and Jacob. It had been 3 days since their confrontation. 3 days since she'd stopped trying to make sense of the ache that followed her everywhere. Downstairs, Jacob's footsteps were faint, restless. He'd been home, but not really there. Sometimes he'd linger by the living room window, staring out at the skyline, as if waiting for it to speak. Other times, he'd lock himself in his office, poring over numbers reports, anything that could make him forget what he'd done and what he was starting to feel. But that night, something was different. The lights flickered as thunder rolled over Manhattan, deep and resonant. Evelyn closed her book and stood up, moving to the window. The reflection that stared back at her was pale and tired. Her fingers brushed against the faint swell at her abdomen, still small enough to hide, yet large enough to remind her that her life no longer belonged only to herself. She had thought she would feel joy when she discovered her pregnancy. Instead, it felt like a fragile secret, one she wasn't sure she could share with a man who didn't yet know how to love without breaking things. Evelyn. Jacob's voice startled her. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. I didn't mean to wake you, he said. You didn't. He stepped closer, the distance between them heavy with everything unsaid. We need to talk. She folded her arms. Do we? Yes. He took a slow breath. I don't know how to say this the right way, so I'll just say it. I'm not proud of who I've been. I've done things I can't take back, but I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you. Evelyn blinked, her chest tightening. Don't, she said softly. Don't say that unless you mean it. I do, he said, and for once, there was no hesitation in his voice. I don't know when it happened, but you're the first person I think of when I wake up. The first one I look for when I come home. You make me want to be better, and that terrifies me. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for deceit, for the man who once told her she was a mistake. Jacob, you can't undo the things you said just because you feel guilty. It's not guilt. He stepped closer. It's regret. It's realizing that I've been given something rare and beautiful, and I was too blind to see it. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief had betrayed her too many times before. "Words are easy for you," she whispered. "Love shouldn't sound like an apology." He flinched. "Then what should it sound like?" She turned away. "It should sound like trust." Silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Then Jacob crossed the room, stopping just behind her. "Then tell me how to earn it," he said, his voice low. "Tell me where to start." She hesitated. "Start by telling me the truth, about everything." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Richard Hamilton, the man who raised me. He made my life a deal. He said if I married you, I'd get my company back. I thought it was just business. But what I didn't understand was that he knew I'd fall for you eventually. He knew I'd lose control." Evelyn turned sharply. "So this was all his idea?" "At first, yes." Jacob's throat tightened. "But not now, not anymore." She stared at him, her hands trembling. "And Sophia," his jaw clenched. "Sophia was never who I thought she was. I was in love with the idea of her, not the person. She chose him for his money, and I've been punishing myself ever since. But you—" He paused, voice softening. "You make me want to stop fighting ghosts." The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows. Evelyn's eyes stung with unshed tears. "You hurt me, Jacob. You broke something I didn't think could break." "I know," he said quietly, "but I'll spend the rest of my life fixing it, if you'll let me." Her lips trembled. "You don't even know how." "Then I'll learn." For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of the rain, their breaths, and the slow, hesitant beat of something fragile being reborn. She didn't pull away when he reached for her hand. His touch was tentative, almost reverent. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he murmured, "but I'm asking anyway." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, Jacob. It's something you prove." He nodded slowly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Then give me the chance to prove it." Evelyn looked down, her heart warring with her mind. Then she said quietly, "If I do, don't make me regret it." "I won't." They stood there for a long moment, two broken souls, suspended in the hush between storm and calm. That night, for the first time in months, they shared the same bed. Not as husband and wife, bound by duty, but as two people who had finally stopped running from the truth. Jacob didn't reach for her, didn't ask for more than she could give. He just lay there beside her, watching the rise and fall of her breathing until the storm outside faded to a whisper. In the morning, sunlight spilled gently through the curtains. Evelyn woke to find Jacob still there, half asleep, his hand loosely resting near hers. For a heartbeat, she allowed herself to imagine a world where this quiet peace could last. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft. He smiled, faintly. A real smile, not the polished one he wore for boardrooms. "I was afraid you'd disappear." "Not today," she said. He reached up, brushing his thumb lightly along her cheek. "You should smile more often." "Maybe I will," she said, and for the first time, her heart didn't feel like it was bleeding. Days passed. Slowly, cautiously, they began to rediscover each other. Jacob started coming home earlier. He'd sit in the kitchen while she cooked, asking about her day, listening more than talking. It was awkward at first, small talk from two people learning how to be human again, but something in the air shifted. One night while they were washing dishes together, he said quietly, "Do you ever think about starting over?" Evelyn glanced at him. "Starting over?" "Not from scratch, just differently, without the lies, without the anger. She smiled faintly. People don't just erase the past, Jacob. I'm not asking to erase it, he said, eyes earnest. I'm asking to build something better on top of it. Her heart clenched. She wanted to say yes, but the weight of her secret pressed against her chest. The baby. Jacob. She began carefully. There's something I need to tell you. But before she could, his phone rang. He sighed, glancing at the screen. It's work. Give me 5 minutes. She nodded, masking the disappointment on her face. He stepped into the next room, voice low and clipped as he spoke to someone on the other end. Evelyn turned off the tap, her hands trembling. She didn't know why it was so hard to tell him, maybe because she feared it would break the fragile peace they'd built. When he returned, she was sitting by the window, her hands folded over her lap. Everything okay? He asked. Yes. She forced a smile. Just tired. He sat beside her, resting his hand over hers. I want you to know something, he said softly. Whatever happens, I'm here. No more secrets, no more running. Her throat tightened. You promise, I promise. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. The truth sat between them, like a living thing waiting to be spoken, waiting to be free. But not tonight. Tonight she wanted to believe in the illusion that the man beside her was no longer the one who'd broken her heart, but the one who might finally learn to heal it. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass, and for a fleeting moment, Manhattan didn't feel so cold. Jacob glanced down at her, at the woman who had somehow survived his darkness and still found the strength to love. He whispered into her hair so softly, she almost didn't hear it. Maybe this time we'll get it right. And though she said nothing, her fingers tightened around his, not as forgiveness, not yet as forever, but as something fragile and real, hope. The first morning of January carried a kind of light that didn't belong to winter, gentle, forgiving, almost tender. Snow still clung to the city's rooftops, but the sky above Manhattan was clean and bright, as if the world itself had decided to start over. Evelyn woke to the sound of the city humming. Below the penthouse, the faint echo of car horns softened by glass and height. Jacob was already gone. His side of the bed was cool, the sheets smooth, his absence neatly folded into the morning. There was a note on the nightstand in his precise handwriting. Meeting downtown. Back for dinner. J. She smiled faintly. It was strange how even the smallest gestures from him had begun to mean something. Weeks ago, she would have found the formality of it cold. Now it felt like a language they were learning together, his way of saying, I'll come back. She dressed slowly, her hand brushing the faint curve of her stomach. It wasn't showing yet, but she could feel the quiet pulse of it, the small reminder of everything that was changing. Every morning she promised herself she would tell him. Every morning she found another reason to wait. By afternoon the sky had turned silver. She was in the study reading through the letters Jacob had left unopened for months' donations, invitations, things he used to ignore. She found herself smiling at the thought of him now, trying clumsily but sincerely to be different. When the phone rang, she answered without looking at the number. Mrs. Miller. The voice on the other end was male professional. This is Dr. Langston's office. I'm calling to confirm your next appointment. Her pulse skipped. Yes, of course. Jacob's voice suddenly came from behind her. Appointment for what? The folder slipped from her hands. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, coat still on snow melting from his shoulders. Jacob, she said softly, you're home early. He didn't smile. Answer me. What appointment? She swallowed. It's nothing serious. Evelyn, he said, stepping closer. Don't lie to me. I'm not lying. He looked at her for a long moment, too long, and then something in his expression shifted. His gaze dropped briefly to her stomach, and realization dawned like a slow, dangerous light. How long have you known? His voice was barely above a whisper. Her breath caught. A few weeks. His jaw tightened. And you didn't tell me. I was going to. When his tone cracked. After the baby was born. After you'd decided what I deserved to know. Her eyes filled. Jacob. Please don't. He laughed short and bitter. God, I must look like a fool. You've been keeping this from me while sleeping in the same bed every night. Because I didn't know how you'd react, she said, her voice trembling. Because you've spent months pushing me away and pulling me back. I needed to be sure. Sure of what he demanded. That I wouldn't care. No, she whispered, that you wouldn't leave. The anger in his face faltered just for a moment. You think I'd walk away from you? From my child, I didn't know Jacob. You've always walked away when things got hard. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. You think so little of me. I think you're afraid, she said softly, of loving something that might love you back. The silence between them was unbearable. Evelyn pressed a hand to her abdomen, her breath shaky. I wanted to tell you when it felt right, but I'm scared, Jacob. Not of you, of what this means. He looked back at her, his voice rough. It means everything. It changes everything. Then prove it, she whispered. He stepped forward, his hand reaching toward her, hesitant, almost reverent. When his palm rested over hers, covering the small secret she'd been carrying, his breath hitched. There's really... He couldn't finish. His voice broke into a whisper. There's really a baby. Evelyn nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Something fragile in him gave way. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she might vanish if he loosened his grip. I don't deserve this, he said against her hair. But I swear to God, I'll try to be the kind of man who does. She closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the warmth of him, the one place that still felt like home, even after everything. That night they sat together by the fireplace, the storm outside muffled by thick curtains. For once, neither of them spoke about the past. Jacob's hand stayed laced with hers, his thumb tracing slow circles over her fingers. Do you think it's a boy or a girl? He asked quietly. She smiled through her tears. You're already thinking ahead. I want to be ready, he said. I've spent most of my life unprepared for the things that matter. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his voice trembled when he spoke. You'll be a good father, Jacob. He shook his head. I'll make mistakes. I already have. Then we'll make them together. He turned to her eyes, glistening. You really think we can do that? I don't know, she said softly, but I want to believe we can. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that felt like a promise. The next morning she woke to the smell of coffee. When she walked into the kitchen, Jacob was standing there, in a black sweater, sleeves rolled up, 2 mugs waiting on the counter. You made coffee? She said, surprised. I did, he replied. It's not as good as yours. She laughed, and the sound filled the room like sunlight. You're trying. I told you I would. He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers as he handed her the cup. You should rest more. You're pale. I'm pregnant, not sick. Still, he said, you're carrying our future. The words lingered in the air, fragile and hopeful. But by afternoon, that fragile piece cracked. Jacob received a call, Richard Hamilton again. Evelyn heard his voice from the study, sharp and low. his tone darkening with every word. When he emerged, his face was pale, his eyes stormy. "What happened?" she asked, setting down her book. He hesitated. "It's business. You're lying." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Richard found out about the baby." Her heart dropped. "How, I don't know. But he called it a distraction, said it would make me weak." Evelyn's voice trembled. "What did you say?" "I told him he was wrong." Jacob's tone hardened. "That I'd rather be weak with you than powerful without you." Her eyes softened. "You said that." He nodded. He didn't take it well. She stepped forward, touching his arm. "You don't have to fight him, Jacob." He looked at her eyes, dark and unyielding. "I've been fighting him my whole life. But this time, I'm not fighting for revenge. I'm fighting for us." Evelyn felt something inside her break open, a tenderness so fierce it almost hurt. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong. "Just promise me," she murmured. "Don't lose yourself again." He kissed the top of her head. "Not this time." That night they ate dinner by candlelight. The city below shimmered in gold and silver, a constellation of stories beyond their window. Evelyn laughed more than she had in months. Jacob watched her, as though trying to memorize every detail: the curve of her smile, the sound of her laughter, the way she unconsciously touched her stomach when she talked about the future. "Do you remember," he said quietly, "the night you told me you'd wait for me?" She looked up. "I remember. I never deserved that kind of patience," he said. "But I'm grateful you had it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe patience was the only thing I had left." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "You have me now." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The candles flickered, the snow outside thickened, and the world felt smaller, quieter, as if holding its breath for them. Later, when they stood together on the balcony, Jacob wrapped his arms around her, from behind his chin, resting lightly on her shoulder. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be," he whispered, "but I promise our child will never wonder if they're loved." Evelyn's eyes stung. "And what about me?" He turned her gently in his arms, his gaze steady. "You'll never wonder either." The wind brushed against them, cold and soft, carrying away the last traces of their old selves. For the first time, they didn't feel like two people trying to rebuild from ruins. They felt like something new, something fragile, yes, but alive. Evelyn leaned into him, her heartbeat syncing with his, and whispered, "Then maybe we're finally home." The morning sun broke through the skyline of Manhattan, like liquid gold spilling across glass and steel. Inside the penthouse, the world was still a delicate kind of stillness that felt earned, fragile, and alive. Evelyn lay half awake, the soft hum of the city beneath her, the quiet rhythm of another heartbeat inside her chest. Jacob was beside her, half turned toward her, one arm draped over her waist, as if afraid she might slip away if he let go. She studied his face in the filtered light. There was something unguarded in him lately, a gentleness she had never thought possible. The sharp edges of the man she'd once feared had softened into something human, imperfect, and quietly beautiful. He stirred as if sensing her gaze. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice low, husky with sleep. "Maybe," she said with a faint smile. "I'm just trying to remember this." He opened his eyes, blue and clear. "Remember what?" "This peace," she whispered. "I don't want to forget what it feels like." Jacob brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then don't. I'll make sure you never have to." She smiled, but there was something bittersweet behind it. Love had always felt fleeting to her, like a song she could hear, but never hold. And yet, As his hand found hers, she allowed herself for once to believe. The following weeks unfolded like pages in a story they were both afraid to end. Jacob canceled 2 international meetings to stay close. Evelyn teased him for it, but secretly she was grateful. They began walking together in Central Park on quiet mornings, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was full. But perfection, Evelyn knew, was never meant to last. It began one evening, when the phone rang during dinner. Jacob hesitated before answering. Evelyn was about to pour another glass of water when she heard it, the voice on the other end, faint but unmistakable. Sophia Hamilton. Her heart skipped, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. Jacob's tone shifted, clipped, formal. "This isn't a good time." She couldn't hear Sophia's words, but whatever they were made his face pale. "No," he said sharply. "We're done, Sophia. There's nothing left to say." Evelyn froze in the kitchen doorway. He ended the call and turned, startled, to find her standing there. "She called you Evelyn," said quietly. Jacob sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. "It wasn't what you think." "Then tell me what it was." "She wanted money," he said bitterly. "Richard's company is falling apart. She wanted me to buy it, to save the family name." Evelyn's throat tightened. "And what did you tell her?" "That there's no family left to save." He stepped closer, but she looked away. "Why didn't you tell me she could still reach you? I didn't think it mattered anymore." "It matters," she whispered, "because she's the reason you built these walls in the first place. She's the reason you stopped believing in love." Jacob's voice softened. "And you're the reason I started again." But the words, no matter how tender, couldn't erase the tremor of doubt that had crept into her chest. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside her. Every memory, every hurt, every uncertain promise whispered through her mind. She touched her belly, felt the faint flutter that was beginning to show. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. In the days that followed, Jacob tried harder. He was attentive, patient. But Evelyn felt the distance return, not from anger, but from fear. She was terrified that the love she'd built with him was fragile, that it would crumble the way everything else in his life once had. Then one morning, the phone rang again. Evelyn answered this time, expecting one of Jacob's associates. But the voice that came through was smooth, cold, familiar. "Mrs. Miller," Sophia said. "We've never met, but I think it's time we did." Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "To tell you the truth," Sophia replied. "Your husband hasn't told you everything." The line went dead. When Jacob came home that evening, Evelyn was waiting for him in the living room. The city lights shimmered through the glass behind her, painting her silhouette in gold. "Where were you today?" she asked softly. "Meetings," he said carefully. With who, he hesitated just long enough for her to know. "She called me," Evelyn said. "Sophia." Jacob froze. "What did she say?" "That there's something you haven't told me." His jaw clenched. "She's lying. Maybe she said. But I need to hear it from you." He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. "Richard's will. He left conditions when he gave me back the company. One of them was the marriage us, the other was that I'd never sell the Hamilton shares. Sophia came today to remind me that if I do, she can challenge the agreement." Evelyn's chest ached. "So she still has control." "Not over me," he said quickly, "but over what you built. Over us." He looked at her, his voice breaking. "I'm trying to protect what's ours, Evelyn. I don't care about her or him or any of it. You and this baby are all that matter to me." She wanted to believe him. God, she did. But something about Sophia's voice lingered a shadow, she couldn't shake. Then promise me, she said quietly. Promise me you'll cut every tie with her. No meetings, no calls, no negotiations. He hesitated, then nodded. I promise. But the next day, that promise broke. Jacob didn't mean to see Sophia again. She showed up at his office unannounced, a storm in red silk and perfume. You've made a mistake, Jacob, she said, leaning across his desk. You think you can erase me, but you can't. I already have, he said coldly. She smiled. Does Evelyn know you only married her to win back what was yours? He froze. That was before you fell in love. Her laugh was sharp, cruel. You're still the same boy trying to prove something to his father. You can't escape that. Get out, he said through his teeth. But Evelyn had already seen. She'd come to surprise him, with lunch, standing frozen in the doorway, the sound of Sophia's laughter cutting through her like glass. Sophia turned, her smile widening. Ah, Mrs. Miller. How poetic. Jacob stood abruptly. Evelyn, wait. She didn't. The elevator doors closed before he could reach her. That night she packed a bag. The city outside the window was blurred by tears, her reflection pale against the glass. She left a letter on the table. I believed you when you said you'd changed. Maybe that was my mistake. Don't look for me. I need to find the part of myself that doesn't break every time you do. Jacob found the letter an hour later. His hands trembled as he read it once, twice again, as if sheer repetition could change the words. He called her. No answer. He drove through the city for hours, headlights cutting through the rain, her name echoing in every thought. By dawn, he was parked outside her mother's house in Queens. But she wasn't there. She left last night, her mother said, eyes wary. She said she needed time. Jacob nodded numbly. If she calls, I'll tell her you're looking, her mother said gently. But maybe that's not what she needs to hear right now. For the first time in years, Jacob felt powerless. All his wealth, his empire, his influence, none of it could bring her back. Days turned into weeks. He stopped shaving, stopped attending meetings. He spent nights on the balcony staring at the skyline. She used to love the city, she said, made her feel small and infinite all at once. He didn't know she was only a few miles away. Evelyn had checked into a small inn by the coast, the kind of place where no one knew her name. The sea air was cold and clean. Each morning she walked along the beach, her hand resting over her growing belly, whispering to the child she carried. You're safe now. You're my reason. One evening she stood by the water, the sky painted in shades of violet and gold. The wind carried the scent of salt and rain, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something close to peace. Behind her, a voice she'd once thought she'd never hear again broke through the sound of waves. Evelyn. She turned, her breath catching. Jacob stood a few feet away, rain-soaked, exhausted, his eyes raw and unguarded. I told you not to come, she whispered. I couldn't stay away, he said, voice breaking. You can leave me, Evelyn. Hate me. But please don't shut me out of this. He looked at her stomach, then back at her, his voice trembling. That's my child, too. Evelyn's tears mixed with the rain. You can't keep doing this, showing up only when you're afraid to lose. I'm not afraid anymore, he said. I'm here because I finally know what I want. You, us, a family. She looked at him for a long moment, every memory flickering between them, the love, the pain, the promises broken and remade. Then show me, she said quietly. Don't just say it. Show me. Jacob took a step closer, rain sliding down his face like confession. I will, he whispered. For the rest of my life I will. The waves crashed behind them, fierce and wild, as if the world itself bore witness to the fragile miracle of two people daring once again to believe in love. The wind that swept along the coast that evening was soft tender, even carrying the faint scent of salt and rain. Evelyn stood a few steps away from Jacob, the waves breaking gently behind her. Her dress fluttered in the wind like a fragile ribbon, her hair damp and tangled, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. Jacob looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not the wife he'd betrayed or the woman he'd failed, but the heartbeat of everything he'd been too afraid to love. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The sea filled the silence between them, vast and unending. Then finally she said, "You shouldn't have come." Jacob took a slow step closer. "I couldn't stay away. Every time you say that," she whispered, "you tear something open again." "Then let me heal it," he said softly. Evelyn turned her gaze toward the horizon. The light was fading. The sun was sinking into the water, painting the waves in gold. "It's not that simple." He took another step. "It can be." She shook her head. "You think words can fix everything, Jacob. But love isn't a business deal you can renegotiate." His voice broke. "Then tell me how to make it right." "You can't," she said quietly. "Not with promises, not with regret." Her words landed like stones, but there was no anger in them, only exhaustion, only truth. Jacob swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Then let me stay, just for tonight. I won't ask for anything else." Evelyn hesitated. She wanted to say no, to send him away before her heart betrayed her again. But when she looked at him, drenched, trembling, his eyes pleading, she saw not the man who had broken her heart, but the man who had been learning slowly and painfully how to love. She nodded once, one night. They walked back toward the small inn together, their steps silent, except for the crunch of wet sand beneath their feet. Inside, the air was warm, the light dim. Jacob removed his coat water dripping onto the floor and hung it by the door. Evelyn moved quietly to light the fireplace, her movements gentle, deliberate. "Evelyn," he said, after a moment, his voice low. "Does he or she move yet?" Her hand instinctively brushed her belly. "Sometimes," she said softly, "mostly at night." Jacob smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I?" She hesitated, then nodded. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his palm trembling as it met the gentle curve of her stomach. The warmth of her skin, the faint rhythm beneath it, it stole his breath away. "There," she whispered. "Do you feel it?" He nodded, unable to speak. His hand lingered reverent. "I never knew I could love someone I haven't even met yet," he said finally. Evelyn's voice was soft. "That's what love is, Jacob. It's faith before proof." He looked up at her, then, eyes glistening. "Then I have faith in you, in us." She closed her eyes. "You always say the right words when it's too late." He rose slowly, standing inches from her. "Then, let me prove I mean them." "By doing what?" "By staying," he said simply, not as the man who left, but as the man who finally came home. Evelyn turned away, her shoulders trembling. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "When I left New York, I wasn't just leaving you. I was leaving who I was when I loved you, the woman who kept waiting for you to become someone you weren't ready to be." Jacob's voice broke. "And who are you now?" She looked at him over her shoulder, her eyes bright with tears. "Someone who wants to love without fear. Someone who doesn't want her child to grow up in a house built on apologies." He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Then let me build something new with you." Her silence lingered heavy and uncertain. Then softly she said, "You can't just erase the past, Jacob." "I'm not trying to erase it," he said. I'm trying to learn from it. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the floor. You think learning is enough? He took a deep breath. It has to be. The fire crackled between them, throwing soft light across their faces. Outside, the storm had eased, leaving only the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Jacob reached for her hand again, and this time, she didn't pull away. Do you remember, he said gently, the first time we danced, at the charity gala? She laughed softly through her tears. You didn't want to. I didn't know how, he said, smiling faintly. But you didn't care. You just told me to follow your lead. Her smile faded. We were different then. Were we, he asked, because when I look at you now, I still see the same woman who made me believe there was something worth saving in me. Her breath caught the ache in her chest, returning like a slow tide. You're not making this easier. I'm not trying to, he said. I'm just trying to be honest. They stood there, the air thick with everything neither of them could say. Then finally she whispered, I don't know if I can trust you again. Jacob nodded slowly. Then let me earn it one day at a time. She stared at him for a long moment. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the sharp lines she'd once feared. He looked older now, more fragile, but also more real. Evelyn, he said quietly, I know I've lost you before, but if there's even a chance, the smallest chance that you still love me, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. Her voice trembled. And what if I can't love you the way I used to? Then I'll love you the way you are now. Something inside her broke, then not from pain, but from the unbearable tenderness of it. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling. Why do you always know how to find the words when I've stopped looking for them? Because you taught me, he said simply. The tears she'd been holding finally fell. Jacob wiped them away gently, his thumb brushing the corner of her lips. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned in, and this time, when his lips found hers, she didn't resist. It wasn't the desperate, fevered kind of kiss they'd once shared. It was soft, steady, a promise whispered between breaths. The kind of kiss that came not from passion alone, but from recognition of two people who had broken, healed, and somehow still found their way back. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn pressed her forehead against his. If we do this, she said, if we start over, it has to be real. No lies, no ghosts, just us. Just us, he repeated. They didn't speak after that. The room filled with quiet, the kind that didn't need words. He held her as she rested her head against his chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, neither of them were pretending to be strong. Hours later, when the fire had burned down to embers, Jacob whispered into her hair, I'll stay here as long as you'll have me. Evelyn murmured, half asleep, Then don't let go. He didn't. Morning came slowly, spilling light across the room. Evelyn woke first, her head resting against his shoulder, his hand still curled protectively around hers. For a moment she didn't move. The weight of the night lingered, not heavy, but grounding. She turned slightly, watching the way the early sun touched his face. He looked peaceful, unburdened, and she realized something she hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a choice made again and again in the quiet spaces between anger and love. She pressed a soft kiss to his hand. Maybe, she whispered, we'll be okay. Jacob stirred his fingers, brushing against hers in his sleep. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt something like certainty. Not that everything would be perfect, but that they would keep trying. And maybe in the trying, they'd finally find the love they'd both been searching for all along. The spring air in Maine was crisp, full of salt and new beginnings. The ocean shimmered under a rising sun, and gulls danced above the water's edge. Evelyn stood on the porch of the small cottage she and Jacob had decided to rent by the coast, a place where the world seemed to breathe slower, softer. The sound of the waves below had become the rhythm of their days. Inside, she could hear Jacob humming quietly. It was an unfamiliar sound, gentle and low, as he tried again to make pancakes for breakfast. The scent of burnt batter mixed with coffee drifted into the morning air. Evelyn smiled faintly, one hand resting on her round belly. "Jacob," she called through the open door, "you're going to start another fire." His laugh came from the kitchen, warm and boyish. "Don't underestimate me, Mrs. Miller. This time, I've got it under control." She stepped inside to find him in a plain gray t-shirt and messy hair, holding a spatula like a sword. Flour dusted his jaw, and the skillet on the stove was clearly losing the battle. "Under control, huh?" she teased. "That pancake looks like a map of Europe." He grinned sheepishly. "Modern art. You don't appreciate genius when you see it." She leaned against the counter watching him. It still felt surreal, this version of him. The man who used to rule boardrooms now struggled with measuring cups and kitchen timers. Yet here, in the quiet chaos of their small rented kitchen, he looked more at peace than he ever had in his Manhattan penthouse. "Maybe," she said softly, "genius should stick to toast." He raised an eyebrow. "You're lucky I love you." "Am I?" she asked with a playful smile. "Completely." He stepped closer, his hand brushing over hers. The teasing faded into something deeper. "And I'll spend every day proving it." Her heart tightened. Even now, months after that night by the sea, the night she had allowed him to stay there, were moments when his sincerity caught her off guard. It was as if he'd been reborn into gentleness. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "You already have." He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. "Good. Because I'm never losing you again." Later, they ate breakfast by the window overlooking the ocean. The sunlight spilled across the table, glinting off Evelyn's wedding band, a simple gold circle she'd once taken off in pain and had put back on in forgiveness. She traced it absent-mindedly as Jacob sipped his coffee. "Have you thought of any names yet?" he asked suddenly. Evelyn smiled. "For the baby." "For our tiny revolution," he said with a grin. She laughed softly. "You still think of everything as a war. Old habits." She looked thoughtful for a moment. "If it's a girl, I was thinking Grace, after my mother." Jacob nodded slowly, his expression tender. "Grace. I like that." And if it's a boy, he leaned back, pretending to ponder deeply. "Something strong. Something that sounds like he could change the world." Evelyn smiled. Jacob Jr. made a face. "Absolutely not. One Jacob is enough trouble for this family." Her laughter filled the kitchen, mingling with the sea breeze drifting through the open window. For a while, it felt as if the world had forgiven them, if such a thing were possible. The lawsuits that had once shadowed Jacob's empire had been settled. His name was quietly restored in the business world, but he had chosen not to return to it fully. Instead, he spent his time investing in small community projects, building schools, shelters, places that reminded him of the life Evelyn had taught him to see beyond power and wealth. In the afternoons, he would walk with her along the cliffs, their fingers intertwined, the ocean crashing below. Sometimes they talked about the future. Other times they said nothing at all. And every night before they slept, he would whisper the same words against her shoulder. "I'm grateful for the second chance." But life, even in its gentlest form, never stops testing love. It was a stormy evening in late May when the call came. Jacob had gone into town for groceries, and Evelyn was reading by the fireplace when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, smiling automatically when she saw his name, only to hear chaos on the other end. "Mrs. Miller," a stranger's voice said, urgent, trembling. "Your husband. There's been an accident." The phone nearly slipped from her hand. The world blurred. The drive to the hospital was a haze of headlights and rain. Evelyn's heart pounded as she ran through the sterile corridors, guided by nurses whose faces blurred through her tears. When she finally saw him, lying pale against the white sheets, her knees almost gave way. Jacob's head was bandaged, his arm in a sling, a thin line of blood tracing his temple. His eyes were closed. "Jacob," she whispered, clutching his hand. "Please, please open your eyes." Moments later, his fingers twitched, and his eyes fluttered open. "Evelyn." His voice was hoarse, but alive. She exhaled a sob that was half relief, half disbelief. "You idiot." She choked out tears, spilling down her face. "You promised me no more dramatic entrances." He smiled weakly. "I had to keep things interesting." She leaned down her forehead, pressing to his. "Don't you ever scare me like that again. I won't." He whispered, "Not ever." The doctor assured her it was only a concussion and minor injuries. Still, Evelyn refused to leave his side that night. She sat in the chair beside his bed, watching him sleep, her hand resting over his heart. Somewhere in the quiet of that sterile room, she realized how fragile happiness really was, how it could disappear in a blink, and how fiercely it needed to be protected. The next morning, Jacob woke to find her still beside him, her head resting on the edge of his bed. He smiled faintly and brushed a hand through her hair. "You stayed." "I always do," she murmured without opening her eyes. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." When they returned home days later, the sky was clear again. Evelyn stood by the window watching the light shimmer across the waves. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "I thought I lost you," she said softly. "You won't," he whispered. "Not in this lifetime." Weeks passed, the house filled with warmth, laughter, and the soft chaos of preparing for a new life. Jacob painted the nursery himself, getting more paint on his clothes than the walls. Evelyn sat in the doorway watching him with a smile. "You're terrible at this," she teased. He laughed. "Then it's a good thing our child won't care about straight lines." When the baby finally came, a girl, they named her Grace, just as Evelyn had wanted. Her cries filled the small hospital room, fierce and alive, and when Jacob held her for the first time, his hands trembled. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She has your eyes." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "And your stubbornness." He looked up at her, then his voice breaking. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She reached up, cupping his face. "Thank you for giving me something worth holding on to." Years would pass before either of them would fully understand how extraordinary their story had been. Two broken people who had rebuilt love from the ashes of betrayal and fear. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that existed was the tiny heartbeat between them, the proof that love, even when fractured, could still create something whole. On quiet evenings after Grace had fallen asleep, they would sit on the porch together, watching the horizon fade into dusk. Jacob would hold Evelyn's hand, tracing slow circles against her skin, as if memorizing her all over again. Do you ever think he would ask how close we came to losing everything? Evelyn would smile. Sometimes. But I think maybe we had to lose each other once to learn how to find our way back. He would nod, his eyes soft with understanding. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life finding you again and again." And she would lean into him, her voice barely a whisper. "Then we'll never be lost." The sea stretched endlessly before them, The same sea that had once carried their pain, now reflecting their peace. In the soft glow of twilight, Evelyn looked at the man beside her, at the child sleeping inside, and felt a truth settle deep in her heart. Wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But when it was real, it was worth everything. She turned to Jacob and said, her voice filled with quiet conviction, "We didn't just survive, Jacob. We became." He smiled, kissing her hand. "Then let's keep becoming." And as the stars began to rise over the water, their laughter mingled with the sound of the waves, a love once broken, now whole again, carrying them into forever. If you believe in second chances, in the kind of love that fights breaks and still chooses to stay, then maybe, just maybe, this story was never only theirs. It belongs to anyone who's ever dared to love again.